Looks like we're starting. So, hi, I'm Lisa Evans, and this is Matt Dyet. We're from Stirfire, which is a little game studio in Perth that makes its own games. It's made Freedom Fall and Symphony of the Machine and some other games. We also do projects for clients, and very often we get asked to do little serious games. And my background is that I've started off doing astrophysics and then got into tech art and mostly worked in games in tech art, but then I have been doing a PhD for the past few years in a serious games kind of area, communicating climate change, and I've been bringing some of the stuff that I've learnt from that into the serious games that we do at Stirfire.
And so I'm the producer at Stirfire. I've got a background primarily in production, but I've also dabbled in art and a bit of programming. Previously, I've worked with others on a bunch of different serious games projects for a science exhibition centre over in Western Australia called SciTech. So we made a bunch of exhibits for them. These are actually physical big exhibits. Quite a few of them have been shipped around the world. One of the most recent ones that we worked on for them actually ended up at NASA over at Houston. Just a variety of really interesting and fun games. Yeah.
So Safety Beach is a game that we made for one of these kind of smaller clients that we tend to end up working with, which was Surf Life Saving WA, which, a lot of serious games will be made for small non-profit kind of organisations, government bodies and things like that. And so this is kind of a typical, project with something very serious to say, which,
we'll get to the specifics of that.
But only a very modest budget. And so these clients tend to want to minimise the risks involved, even though they still want to have a game. And there's kind of like a conflict between those two things. And so this talk is about how we kind of, in talking to them, we managed to convince them that we could make something that was a bit more of a game, but still ensure that we were conveying what they wanted us to convey and have the kids learn what they were supposed to be learning. And so I've got a little video here of my daughter, 7-year-old daughter, playing the game, just to show you what it's like.
So while it's playing, give a shout out to our awesome artist, Hien, who recently did a Kickstarter that was successful, which is...
we were very lucky to get his
he's a fantastic artist. But if you haven't heard about his Kickstarter, you should find it up and put some money on for him.
Yeah.
We will get to the mechanics specifically. Yeah, this is basically showing the end result of what we worked on.
My daughter getting a little frustrated.
Level complete.
Okay. So Matt will talk about the brief.
So we were brought into Surf Life Saving to have a meeting with them because they wanted to get a game of some description that would teach kids about the rules on the beach, like the rules that keep them safe while they're on the beach. But they weren't really sure what sort of form that should take. And so internally they were throwing around all these ideas, and they were like, okay, so the idea that we had, this was basically the first meeting we had with them. They brought us in, we sat down, and they're like, so the idea that we've been throwing around internally is to do a quiz-based game. And we were immediately like, no. And they're like, yeah, we were kind of thinking the same thing. We weren't really feeling that the kids were going to be engaged with the quiz game. It's like, yes, you would be correct. That is kind of a running theme with teachers in particular that don't quite understand that games can teach ideas through their mechanics. So obviously they realized this was going to have a struggle to keep children's attention. They were already fairly convinced that they were going to be making a game, but they wanted to make sure that children were coming back and interacting with this product over and over again of their own accord. They would go out to schools and introduce children to the game through a learning program that they actually have where they go and visit schools. But they would actually have the app there available on a tablet and be like, here's the game, you can play it a little bit, and it should be fun enough, the kids will be engaged enough and go, I'm going to go back home and ask my mum and dad to install it on my phone for me, or install it on their tablet so I can come back and play it again. So while we were there at that meeting, when you're playing with something like Surf Lifesaving, it's very easy to immediately be like, there's so many design ideas that come to mind just from that concept. And so we basically on the spot pitched them the idea that is essentially what the game is now. From the perspective of, okay, you're playing somebody that's on the beach, that's a surf lifesaver, and making sure that everybody that's swimming around on the beach is staying safe. It was an opportunity as well for Surf Lifesaving to expand out their branding, because right now, as far as Surf Lifesaving branding goes, you have very iconic hats and outfits of surf lifesavers on the beach. You have their flags. You have a lot of the documents that they hand out, which are actually incredibly dry, and they even admitted that. I recall from the discussion, they handed us this stack of papers that was all just like information documents for schools and children and everything, and they're like, we hate these. But yeah, so it's an opportunity for them to expand out and find new ways to actually start teaching teachers and parents and children different ideas about how you can actually be safe on the beach. So we agreed to go away for them, write up a design document. At this point, like, no money's been exchanged or anything like that. We're basically just making an agreement that we'll put together a design document, pitch it to them, see if they like it, and if they do like it, we'll go away and we'll actually make the game. We wrote down all these concepts, which Lisa primarily worked upon, which we'll show off when we get around to it. We gave them back the concepts and they were really excited. Like they were just super like, yes, we are doing this thing. We were also internally excited to actually be making this thing, because as far as learning games go, this is the most gamey game that you can kind of get. And the document that we ended up creating is actually really close to what the final product is today. So this is one of those pieces of paper that they handed us, and this is basically the 7 safety rules that Surf Lifesaving has. So you've got swim between flags, swim with a friend, if you need help, raise your arm, be sun safe, read the safety signs, never swim under the influence, and in emergency, dial 000 police. So we agreed to do 3 of those mechanics with them: swim between the flags, swim with a friend, and if you need help, raise your arm. The agreement was that the game should be extendable so that we can come back later on and do these other mechanics. But obviously something like never swim under the influence, there's going to be a really challenging mechanic to do if we do it in future, because it's particularly being communicated to children. So whether or not that one even happens at all is a completely different matter.
Okay, so when it came to trying to ensure that we designed these mechanics in a way that children would learn from the game, I wanted to really use the concept of procedural rhetoric. So does anyone here know about procedural rhetoric as an idea? Yeah. Oh, cool. So this comes from, the kind of academic world of game studies, and it's, a very common idea in that world, but not so much understood in the world of actual game design, which is, so the word rhetoric is all about, as I said, making an argument. So you can make an argument in an essay, you can make it in a documentary, you can make it in all kinds of different ways. But the really cool thing about making arguments using games is that we have these rules and procedures that are a little bit more kind of deeply entwined in the way games work. So if you make your rules and procedures to be about the way a system in the real world works, and then people come and play the game that you've created according to those rules and procedures and try to find the way to succeed in that space, they have to learn about the systems that you've embedded into that game. You can't succeed without learning in that way. So if you're really careful and you can create a kind of a one-to-one relationship between the rules in the game and the rules in the real world, then you can use games in a really clever way to teach people and to lead to what we call deep learning, where it's more than just, kids rote learning, okay, these are the safety rules of the beach, you do this, you do this, you do this. The kind of deep learning that we were interested in and the surf lifesaving we were interested in was kids actually understanding why the rules are important. So I've got an example here of that comes up a lot when people are talking about procedural rhetoric, which was the precursor to the game Monopoly, which was the Landlord's game by Elizabeth Meiji, which she created in 1904, where she designed the game specifically to teach about a specific theory in economics, I think it was called Georgian economics, about the interaction between monopolies and rents and taxation. And so this idea has obviously been around for a very long time, and people have understood for quite a while that you can create games to argue or put a particular argument to your players. So why we used it. So as I said, we didn't just want the children to learn the safety rules, we wanted them to learn why they're there and why they're important. And in a way, just creating a game about them, you're already basically doing that. But an important part of this was making sure that the game wasn't inadvertently giving them the wrong ideas, which it wasn't really something that was in the forefront of my mind in the beginning, but as we went along, we realised it could be actually quite easy to put the wrong ideas into the game, as we'll discuss. So there's some other design strategies or lenses that you can use for serious games, and one of them, I've put a reference here, which if you search for that on scholar.google.com, there's actually a free PDF which discusses these 3 different design lenses for serious games. The first one being information deficit games, which they just contain information to read and quizzes to do, which was the type of game that these smaller serious game clients tend to want to gravitate towards because they're very low risk. And then procedural rhetoric being the second one, but then the third one being emergent dialogue, which goes a little bit further. Instead of just, the game designers making their argument and the players kind of playing through it and learning about it, the players actually, it becomes more of a dialogue or a collaboration between the player and the designers or the people behind the game, where players might create user-generated content or are helping to create the game experience in some way, which is a bit harder to do, a bit more risky. The outcomes are a lot more uncertain, but apparently, because this particular paper is about games for environmental sustainability, so the emergent dialogue lens has been used very effectively in that space.
You particularly see emergent dialogue with like Minecraft. That's Minecraft one that's used as a teaching tool now, and that's emergent dialogue.
Yeah, so a lot harder to make, but a lot more rewarding in many ways, and a lot more kind of extensible. You can apply it in a lot more ways. So then, here are the 3 mechanics that we've been talking about. Swim between the flags. So the obvious mechanic, if you want kids to be focusing on keeping the swimmers between the flags, is that, and we're designing for iPad primarily and iPhone, is to just have them drag swimmers back between the flags when they go outside. So then applying the procedural rhetoric lens to this, if you ask the question, is the player a surf lifesaver, which was the answer at the time was yes, definitely, then the procedural rhetoric there is wrong because it's implying that surf lifesavers are patrolling the area outside the flags and constantly directing the kids to get back inside the flags, which they're not doing. So immediately that was a really useful way to use the idea of procedural rhetoric, which was, okay, we're not mapping the rules of the game to the real world rules here. So we had to think really hard about how to fix that. And then we came up with the mechanic of fading the swimmers out. So as soon as they start to go beyond a flag, they start to fade out. And that turned out to be a really useful idea because then it really demonstrates to the kids that if you go past the flags, surf lifesavers can't see you anymore. It's not necessarily implying that something bad is happening to you right away. It's just saying the surf lifesavers aren't going to be able to see you and they're not going to be able to keep you safe. But it's not explicitly saying that, but it's putting that information there for kids to pick up on. And then that ended up leading to the idea of visibility becoming a really important proposition in the argument that we're making, which is these safety rules are all about surf lifesavers being able to see you, being able to tell when you're in trouble, and being able to help you. So then that then leads to raise your hand if you're in trouble so that the surf lifesavers can see you and help you. So again, visibility becomes a really important point here. And this mechanic was fairly straightforward, that the player just notices when people are in trouble because they've got their hand up and then taps on them, and the little surf lifesavers in the game will swim out and help them. But then that led to the question of what happens if they don't tap them in time? Do we show them drowning? So part of the brief was that we weren't supposed to be showing kids drowning or making the beach seem like an incredibly dangerous place, which might deter kids from wanting to go and swim at the beach and have fun. So we used the fading out mechanic again in place of drowning, in this case just out of necessity. So it's kind of ambiguous there. It's leaving it to the kids' imagination what's actually happening, which kind of shows that you can't always map what's happening in the game one-to-one with what would happen in real life. And then the third mechanic was swim with a friend, which turned out to be really tricky because it's easy enough to have a mechanic where the kids have to drag one swimmer next to another one, and then they both get highlighted and they're linked and they swim around for a little while together and they look really happy. But we didn't want to suggest that when you're swimming with a friend, nothing bad will ever happen to you, because that's not the way it works. You're supposed to be swimming with a friend because it reduces the risks. So you can make it so that they're less likely to get into trouble when they're linked together, but then conveying that information to the kids is then quite tricky. It's a fairly subtle point to be trying to communicate. So we, as Matt will talk about, we had a lot of issues with that one.
Yeah, so with a friend went through a lot of iterations, but we're actually really happy with where it ended up.
Yeah. So the next step was, having used procedural rhetoric to design the game, we proposed to Surf Lifesaving that we would like to do some testing to see whether the game that we designed was actually working in the way that they wanted to, which a lot of the time with these little serious game projects, people just kind of accept that it probably works, and they don't necessarily want to do that kind of testing. But they agreed to it, and it was a great opportunity for us to put into practice some of the stuff that I've been doing with my PhD as well, in terms of qualitative testing. In this case, with a small number of children, just getting them to play the game, and we developed a testing protocol, which I'll talk about.
Surf Lifesaving wasn't just all for the testing. They were really gung-ho about it on their end as well. Like, they were having people with versions of the early game, taking it home and having their kids play it, and then sending us feedback. And actually, a lot of that feedback as well was really, really valuable. But the qualitative testing at the end, where we could actually figure out what was going on, was the most valuable.
So just a word about ethics, because having been doing this for my PhD in a university setting, I have to go through an ethics committee, and it just seemed fairly straightforward to me that I would try and follow the same kind of practices doing this in a kind of business setting outside of a research institution. So we followed the same kind of processes, didn't save any personal information, just used a code number on all of the videos and any written materials that we saved out. We had an information letter and a consent form signed by both the parent / guardian and child, which I just kind of lifted from the Murdoch University website. And we all had working with children cards. But in going through all this, I really tried to find out what are the guidelines for human research outside of research institutions, and it's really not clear. And I find that a bit worrying, especially when you just ask yourself, you know, if something went wrong and one of the participants in this little testing that we were doing felt like they'd been treated badly, who would they go and complain to? And I don't have an answer to that question. So I think that's a really important issue that people need to think about in this kind of space of doing serious games. Because especially since some of the serious games that people make deal with very sensitive issues, like homophobia and bullying and all kinds of interesting things like that. So we came up with a qualitative testing protocol. First of all, I just want to say that there is a conflict of interest when one company that's making a game is also testing it, because you've got an inherent bias where, you know, you've got an incentive to show that what you designed actually worked. So it's not really very scientific to be testing your own work, and it would be great if, you know, in the kind of community of people making serious games, we had ways of dealing with that where, you know, we could all test each other's work instead of testing our own. So that would be awesome. I just wanted to put that out there.
You definitely got to look at your work with a really critical eye and try to remove that personal bias you have for this has to be successful.
Yeah, even just unconsciously, it can be there.
Yeah.
So we designed some interview questions to ask the kids before playing and after playing, and the point was to try and see what they already knew before playing the game without, you know, asking any leading questions. And so we got some great help from our friend Kitty Byrne, who is qualified in early childhood education and development, that kind of thing. But, you know, we'd probably want to iterate over the way we asked those questions the next time, because they didn't necessarily give us all the information that we wanted. So, but it was, you know, really useful. And then we also tried to follow a think aloud protocol of asking the kids to speak their thoughts out loud and recording them while they were playing. But as it turned out, kids can't really talk while they're playing very well at all. So they were, you know, and poor Sophie sitting just over here, she helped us out with the qualitative testing, and she was the one trying to prompt the kids to say what they thought. It was a bit frustrating. So we recorded all the audio and we captured video from the device. We didn't capture any video of the kids themselves. And then to analyse it, I transcribed all the audio in Vivo, which is some research software that, or just specifically for qualitative research, which I have access to through my uni, but there are other types of software to do similar things. And then the way that you handle that in kind of social sciences is you go through a process of coding words and sentences and so on from the transcripts, and then kind of tagging them with terms that tell you what the player was talking about. And then as you do that, you can get common themes. But also just by transcribing everything that they said and then doing a word cloud analysis, which I'm about to show you, the common themes kind of jump out at you. So here's the results, as I said. So we just kind of prepared a report for the customer. It had all these word clouds, but also went a bit deeper into what the common themes were. But I think it's really fun to look at these. So we asked them, what can you tell me about the beach before playing? And they mentioned words like swimming and being careful, and then it's nice and there's water. But they weren't really, they didn't show any kind of specific knowledge of they talk about being careful, but there's nothing specifically there about, you know, what's dangerous and any of the rules. So then you ask, what are some things that can hurt you at the beach? Sharks, maybe. But every single kid said sharks, even though that's really, you know, so rare that there's any shark attacks. And they also, I mean, a few of them mentioned waves. There's other, you know, creatures like jellyfish and snakes and crabs, sharp things. I think partly that was the way the question was worded, that they were thinking specifically about objects that can hurt you. So we could have worded that one a bit better. And how can you keep yourself safe at the beach? There's no mention of any of the safety rules there. It's mainly about keeping their head above water was what they cared about. not going too deep. And there's, the word lifesavers is there, but it's very small. And then, so after playing the game, we asked them some questions, some similar questions, but not necessarily the exact same ones. So we asked them, what did you think about the game? And they thought it was fun, which was awesome. And that was their word that they chose to use. The word boring came up, but that was in the context of after they'd finished kind of learning all the 3 mechanics and they'd played them all a few times, it was getting a bit repetitive. But they also thought it was getting harder, so the word harder is there as well. But you can also see they're already mentioning flags, and they're mentioning friend. The word raise, I think, is in there somewhere. So already just what did you think about the game? They're already mentioning the rules. So that was, they were very forthcoming. And then, can you tell me anything else about the beach? Flags, stay! So it just jumps out at you that it really made an impression on them that, you have to stay between the flags. The other mechanics are much smaller in there. The word raise is in there. The word friend is in there, but it was the flags that really made an impact. What can you do to keep safe at the beach? Flags again. And help and hand for raise your hand. And the word raise is there as well. But then again, friend in there probably, but smaller. And why is it important to follow the beach rules? You might drown, which they hadn't mentioned drowning at all before playing the game. And it's really interesting because we didn't show anybody drowning. So we showed them fading out and left it to their imagination to see to think about what was actually happening to them. And it actually turns out it's really powerful to engage kids' imagination. So they will actually learn from the things that you haven't said that they've been asked to imagine, which I think is really interesting. Yeah. That was something that really made an impact on me from doing this testing. So what did we learn? The children showed, I think, in our opinion, they showed evidence of learning the safety rules after playing the game. And this is qualitative testing. It's not the same as, doing a really big survey on a whole bunch of children that have all played it. We can't really draw conclusions the way you would from that. But we were fairly satisfied, and so were the clients, that they'd showed evidence of learning the safety rules. And they also seemed to have a better appreciation of the dangers, even though they weren't depicted. And they thought the game was fun. That was their word. And there were a few things that were confusing, hard, or didn't work, and it also got repetitive after a while. So obviously from the testing, we had a lot of other design issues that we had to deal with, which Matt will talk about.
Yeah, so you'll note that in the word cloud, after they played, friend didn't come up a lot. And that was because at this point, when we had done the qualitative testing, the way that Swim with a Friend was working was not good. There wasn't the version of it that we were completely satisfied with. So that version of Swim with a Friend at that stage was you would pair swimmers together and it would reduce their chances of getting into trouble, and that was really it. So there was never really any feedback to the player as to what was going on. So they didn't really understand what that kind of meant. So it had gone through a lot of iterations, and the testing had kind of showed us that the way that we were thinking about it was completely wrong. We needed to rethink it entirely. Swim between the flags and raise your hand were fine. Like the qualitative testing basically confirmed that, especially swim between the flags, was just kids recognized it, they got how that worked, they understood. Raise your hand maybe wasn't quite as interesting as dragging swimmers back between the flags, but it worked as well. They had mentioned it, so. And they had also expressed it being fun. The scoring was changed for the game completely. We tore out the previous scoring system as a result of this qualitative testing. I can't quite recall the reason why we had decided so it was a result of the swim with a friend mechanic.
But also with the swim between the flags, that the kids were trying to drag people back.
That's right.
Before they even crossed past the flag.
Yeah.
They kept trying to drag them all back into the middle and not even giving them a chance to go past the flag. And then they would end up with 0 points because they hadn't saved anybody under the original scoring system.
Yeah, so the way that the game originally played, and I kind of get to this when I go to context swapping, But the way the game was originally played was it was all in the context of you're a surf lifesaver. So if you're a surf lifesaver, the way that you earn points is by saving people, right? That's something that we changed. So the testing with friends and family and all the qualitative testing itself influenced all the changes that we ended up making to the game, and it made the game quality so much better. So Swim with a Friend was the mechanic that changed the most over the course of development. Like, the version of it that sits in the design document is entirely different from the version of it that sits in the game right now, except for the fact that you pair swimmers up. But so the original version was that it provided immunity for swimmers. That wasn't fun. It's really boring. It didn't pair well with the other mechanics. But the one thing that the other mechanics had in common was the fading out. Like, whenever you weren't doing something, the swimmers would fade out. So we made it work the way the other mechanics worked. So if swimmers weren't paired up with a friend, they would start fading out. And so now suddenly, whenever the Swim with a Friend mechanic is active alongside something like Raise Your Hand, so if you're not swimming with a friend, you're fading out already. Slower than the other mechanics do, but you're already fading out. So then the moment that you get in trouble and you're already half faded out and you go to raise your hand, they disappear much quicker because they're already partly faded. So it brought the mechanic in line with the rest of the game, and it added this kind of level of additional difficulty, basically. It made the kids had to micromanage much more, which was the game that they wanted to really play. Like, the kids wanted to play a game where they micromanaged swimmers, is basically what they were screaming at us. So we context swapped, and this is where I could say, like, this is our ripple effect from all the testing and all the design that kind of come up to this point. Originally, the context of the game was rescuing swimmers, because that's what a surf lifesaver does. But then through all the testing and through all the feedback from kids and everything, it took us as adults a really long time to get it, but the kids already knew what they wanted. They wanted a game where you micromanage swimmers. So we context swapped away from the idea being about, hey, you're a surf lifesaver on the beach saving swimmers, to you're a surf lifesaver on the beach making sure that swimmers are safe. So the whole idea became about preventing them from getting into trouble rather than saving them when they got into trouble. So because of the old way that we had it built, there was a bunch of clunky things that we tried out, like if the swimmers were outside the flags, that was the only time you could drag them back in, because otherwise, if they were swimming between the flags and you were constantly dragging them around, you would never earn any points because they never got outside the flags. Like, there was a whole variety of reasons that we ended up moving to this sort of mechanic, and it worked so much better. Yeah, so I'm going to bring us down to finally.
Yeah. So, so this was a really interesting process to go through, and, this talk is partly just a recap of what we did, but also we wanted to discuss these kind of more general principles about creating these serious games. Is that, yeah, we use procedural rhetoric and the idea of it to help direct and clarify the game design, but then from the testing, not just finding out whether that worked, but also finding out whether it was fun or engaging and what changes we needed to make to improve that. You do end up having to, with serious games, there's always this problem of there being two different goals, which is it's got to be engaging, it's got to be fun, people have got to enjoy playing it, and then you've got to also be teaching the thing that the serious goal that you're there to convey or educate people about or raise awareness of. And I don't think there's any way around that, So it would be lovely if we could have just made this game where everything mapped perfectly from the game to reality, but then it probably wouldn't have been as much fun to play.
Especially not for kids.
For kids, yeah. Especially. So, but what we did find out was that the testing that we did turned out to be incredibly important. It was beneficial to us, it was beneficial to the client, and it's kind of really odd that so many customers with serious games just don't even bother with that step. And so we're definitely going to be pushing that a lot harder from now on, and exploring further, the best ways to do it, and the best ways to demonstrate that the game that you've made actually is working, which is a really big, kettle of fish, and it's different for every different type of game, depending on whether you're trying to change people's behaviour or teach a skill or raise awareness of an issue. There's so many different things that you would have to test to show that it's working, and it's a massive area of this type of work. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Not really. I think I'm good.
Okay. So, We've got time for questions?
We've got time for questions.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, yeah, sorry?
What kind of time frame are we talking about from, say, coming up with the concept, designing, developing?
So originally, Surf Lifesaving had contacted us, would have been mid last year, and they had wanted to get the game done by the summer so that we could actually bring the game out. They could go out to all the schools while the kids are most actively wanting to go out and go to the beach and everything like that. As here's this awesome game. We were making the game, we were hammering on it and everything, and then suddenly all our contacts at Surf Lifesaving weren't responding to emails. And it turned out a lot of them had gone on holiday. And so the deadline came and went while we're sitting there like, we've got the game, we think, but we haven't heard anything from you. So their deadline went past, and at that stage they were like, okay, well, that's our fault. It's okay. We'll aim for sometime next year. But that also gave us more time to continue to iterate on it. So it's been about a year now. The game still isn't out at the moment. It's been ready for a long time. They just recently asked us for help with the game because they're trying to get Facebook advertising going to direct people to the fact the game exists. But that meant adding some stuff on the game side, which turns out Google and Apple, yeah, not cool with that. So it's kind of caused some complications, but hopefully it'll be out like in the next couple of weeks at the very least. Yeah.
So, who else? Yeah.
First of all, kudos for using procedural rhetoric. I love it.
Thanks.
It's a perfect fit for education games, so it's good to see that that's getting used. I have a question about the helping and swimming with a friend. It's like you said in terms of intentional rhetoric, you were very clear on like you shouldn't be kind of dragging them back between the flags because that's not what a lifesaver does. But lifesaver doesn't actually pair up swimmers.
No.
So like, how do those go against each other? Like, why go against the unintentional rhetoric in one and not another?
Well, it just turned out that, as we were saying, that trying to make it a game where the player was strictly acting in ways that a surf lifesaver would be acting wasn't as engaging. It wasn't really what the kids wanted to be doing. And it kind of morphed. Like, the perspective that the kids are taking when they're playing the game changed to something that was more like this kind of benevolent,
Surf lifesaver god.
kind
is
of
the way I've heard it referred to.
I guess trying to manipulate the kids into doing what they should be doing, into following the rules that they should be following. And that actually, I think, makes them think a bit more about the rules.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was interesting that, the perspective that we thought would be the most, important and the most logical perspective turned out to be too limited. Yeah, so it was, it was useful to think from the point of, to apply procedural rhetoric, but then in other ways it turned out to not be quite enough, in a way, yeah.
With that new paradigm, is that
Yeah.
you could actually bring back the idea of dragging them back between the flags? Or
Well,
It's there now. So the way I kind of perceive it is that the perspective of the game that the kids wanted to experience was less this perspective of a lifesaver saving people and more the perspective of themselves following the rules. Because that's what they were doing, right?
so
Like,
I guess
that's-
it ended up being kind of a combination, because they
Yeah.
do have the fading out, and I think it's important that the fading out was there, because it really put the emphasis on visibility to the surf lifesavers. But yeah, it's interesting that you get this multiple perspective of the part of the player.
Yeah.
It's kind of perspective taking from different angles at the same time, which, I don't know, it seemed to work.
It's worked really well. Like Surf Lifesaving has continually run it by their kids and everything. They understand it better. Once it actually gets out into teachers' hands and everything, like this is an ongoing dialogue between us and Surf Lifesaving Western Australia. And if they come back to us and they say, we actually don't think the game's working particularly well, then that's feedback we're going to take, and we're going to have to figure out another way to actually approach it. But it certainly seems like, from our testing, and again, this could be bias speaking, but it seems like the kids were telling us the sort of game they wanted to play, the sort of game they wanted to get out of it. And it may have deviated away from the procedural rhetoric, but it was the one that was actually making kids wanting to experience more of that thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the client wanted kids to play it at home. Did you design or implement any mechanics that sort of incentivise that?
Yes.
Did you play?
Yeah, so that was actually something that came in halfway through development as well. It was actually something that we added in some time into the game. There was discussion with Surf Lifesaving on several occasions where they were talking about maybe the game should only be you just play the 3 mechanics and that's it. Like they were actually considering deviating away from their original idea. Our concern was really that if the kids weren't given more time to kind of experiment and play with the concepts, they may not fully absorb what the concepts of the game are. And they will make the decision as to when they're done, right? So what we currently have in the game right now is, it's in the video if I go back to it. I'm not going to mess around with that though. But at the end of every level, so you're basically timed while you're playing. You have a time limit within which to keep all the swimmers safe. And then at the end of that, based on how long you've been playing, you gain score for the amount of time that swimmers are safe. Like they basically give you these points that are like, okay, well, I've been safe for the last couple of ticks, so I'm going to reward points for that. If a swimmer gets in trouble, then they stop rewarding points, and if a swimmer fades out completely, then all the swimmers on the screen stop rewarding points. The player is really rewarded for making sure that everyone's safe and sound. At the end of the level, they get a score, basically, on how well they did in the game. And there's basically like a little ranking system. So if you don't do particularly well and you lose a lot of swimmers that have faded out, then you're going to get like a bronze medal. But if you keep everybody safe and everybody's super happy and you've responded really quickly to people getting into trouble, you get like a platinum or a gold. And then once you're outside of the game again, there's like a map selects you. There's actually all the beaches along Western Australia's coast are actually there to choose from as an option. It's one of the really neat things in the game. So a kid can go and be like, oh cool, my beach is there. They select that. But on that map screen, there's a little bar at the top and it's your hero score. And you actually have a rank. And Surf Lifesaving actually provided us with all of the ranks. So I think it's like Nipper is the starting rank. And these are all terms that Surf Lifesaving clubs actually use and everything. So as you progress through the game and you get your points and everything like that, you will actually rank up in this kind of overgame, I suppose, where you become a Surf Lifesaver, basically, over time. Yeah.
But I mean, the problem is that, we've only got these 3 mechanics and so we have been trying to work on making sure that it stays, fun and challenging and doesn't get overly repetitive, which the earlier version kind of did.
Yeah, it still has a repetition issue, I think.
Yeah.
We've been talking at length about like how long we expect children to play, and I expect they'll play through the first 3 mechanics, get to the point where they can get a variety of mechanics and randomization. There's a system in there where there's a ramping difficulty that we've not hand-built levels. It randomizes through different mechanics and everything and kind of keeps track of this ramping difficulty. So the longer you play, the more difficult it gets and the more points you'll gain. Yeah. But it's still the same 3 mechanics. And the only way that we really feel that we can tackle that problem of it being repetitive is by adding the other mechanics and having more variety in there to experience. But that's obviously something that's a budget problem for Surf Lifesaving. Yeah.
So, yep.
You were just talking about the game where the player actually increasing rank as a Surf Lifesaver themselves. Was there any kind of push to try and get kids interested in becoming Surf Lifesavers as a result of this game?
Yes. So the whole reason this game exists is to get kids interested in Surf Lifesaving clubs. Like it's there basically. It's part of the reason why individual beaches exist in the game, because you'll choose a beach, and when you choose a beach, I'm not sure if we can actually see it in the video. I'm kind of tempted to go back now.
Yeah. Hang on.
Just go forward.
Go forward to the beginning, and then. Sorry for all the zooming. If anyone's
it won't do that, so you have to
okay.
go into the intro.
There we are.
So at the start here, if you look at the top, so you see that cap that says City of Perth. That's the City of Perth cap. So you play the game, it's like, oh hey, that's the cap from my club. That's awesome. Oh, that's really cool. And if kids aren't, in a club yet, so towards the end of the game, if I can actually get the mouse pointer, I think I can get the mouse pointer. But towards the end of the video, you'll actually see the score screen and everything, and it has a link as well that goes outside of the app. But is actually like, if you're interested in this Surf Lifesaving club, here's the information on it. It actually links to that Surf Lifesaving club, or it links to the Surf Lifesaving Western Australia website and everything. it will actually talk to the kids and get them encouraged to come and experience what it's actually like on the beach with a lifesaver, basically.
So hard.
Billy has played this so many times now.
Yeah, she's,
Yeah.
obviously still gets frustrated.
So you see the beachsafe.org.au
Level
website
complete.
down there. The nipper, so that's the rank she's right now. You can see the medal that she's got. You can see the hero points that they've gotten. So I think that looks like 764 hero points. So that's all the different stuff that ties into their progression system in playing the game. Yeah.
Yep, sorry.
Oh, geez. So to begin with, I'm trying to recall how much we had told them. So our estimate to begin with was something like 70,000, I believe, to get the base game kind of going and create a product for them that was like laying the framework to expand upon in future. But since then, we've done a whole bunch of additional work for them. I'm pretty sure we came in well under that original estimation. We've done a whole bunch of more work for them right now. So I'd say that the project in total right now is maybe 100 to 110, possibly. Yeah.
With surf lifesaving, obviously there are other elements than just the 7 safety aspects, like identifying risks and all that kind of stuff. Was that ever brought up within the discussions internally, like of adding those other extra aspects that are part of beach safety?
Well, so there's the 7 rules that they were talking about, that they were interested in having in the game. So the game that they wanted basically covered these rules. Like, in addition to getting kids to go to the beach and actually join a club, it was basically all about covering these 7 rules. And so as a part of the initial discussions with them, we were like, doing all 7 of those rules is going to be probably a really, really big budget, but if we focus on just a few, then we can establish that, and then from there expand out. And so, like, in future, sun safe, read the safety signs. Never swimming under the influence would be a really interesting one to try and communicate to children, but I think that would be a challenge that we'd be willing to take on if surf lifesaving was interested. And in emergency calling 000 police, like, all that stuff is things that the game is established now to add. And we understand more about the way the game works and what it should do, so that you can easily just on the spot just go and say, okay, well, how do you make it so that kids go and make sure the swimmers are being sun safe? And you can just have a thing there as, like, you know, you have a sunscreen bar or something like that on each child. You have to tap on them to make sure that their sunscreen's still on.
I was thinking you'd get like a little sunscreen bottle and have to scribble
That'd
all
be
over
cool.
them.
Yeah.
But one thing that we learned from the testing was really the limits of kids' of ability to understand, the dangers and all of the different variables involved in staying safe at the beach. So it really did show that you have to keep it very simple and really try not to confuse them about anything.
Yeah. One of the early versions of the game, so the current version of the game, I don't think there's ever any point where all 3 mechanics are active at the same time. But in earlier versions of the game, all 3 mechanics were active at the same time, and children were losing their minds. Like, it was just too much for them to organise and to keep under control. It's like, this one's swimming outside the flags, this one's got their hand raised, and this one's not partnered with a friend. That was one of the other really interesting issues. We were ramping up how many swimmers were on the beach, and you would get an odd number of swimmers. So what do you do then when you have swim with a friend and you have that one odd swimmer that's slowly fading out because they haven't got a friend?
Panicking.
They're panicking. It's like, I don't know how to micromanage this. And as an adult, you're like, okay, this is an interesting challenge, right? I'll partner these 2 swimmers up. They'll stay partnered for a while, but when they unpartner, this swimmer should still be okay. I can just move one of them over. Kids just aren't thinking that far ahead, right? So one of the things that we changed in the last version of the game is that there's always an even number of swimmers. So that the kids are always just focused on keeping swimmers together, and there's enough swimmers there that they'll stay partnered. Yeah. If one of the swimmers fades out, though, there will be an odd number, and now the kids have just created a challenge for themselves to try and keep that organised. But if we do add those other mechanics in, it will basically be a ramping thing again, right? Like, we'll either have to find a way to make it work with more mechanics at the same time, or just stick to the 2 active mechanics at a time and just randomise them through. Yeah.
Anyone? Oh, yes, sir.
So you mentioned in the qualitative gameplay testing that it was hard to kind of get the kids to verbalise their thoughts on the game. And then you mentioned that you weren't video filming them while they were playing. Is that right?
We were just capturing from the screen, so we weren't showing the kids' faces because
None of them
it's part.
ethics.
But yeah, ethics.
But the kids are really emotive when they're playing. So
Yeah.
wouldn't that have been like a really good source of data?
Well, Sophie here was taking notes. She was observing their body language and taking notes on that, and took really good notes, which was awesome.
That was, you still got data
Yeah.
from
Yeah, but you're right. Like that sort of information is incredibly useful. Like there's in big AAA companies, they've got whole departments that are dedicated to testing how people react, and they'll watch your blood pressure like when you're playing a game.
And even, you know, the detect where you're looking on the screen, and even have electrodes on your head.
But we don't think parents would agree to that.
No, but it did turn out that, you know, the interview questions turned out to be way more important than we initially thought, because we thought the Think Aloud protocol would be more important. But yeah, it's hard to use that on kids, and we hadn't had that experience before. So yeah. Sorry, you had a question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, when the game goes live, do you have any mechanisms or anything to keep that testing going and to keep that data coming back?
We have stuff built in there that basically keeps track anonymously, anonymous data comes in showing how far people are getting into the game, what mechanics they're playing, what they're struggling with, that sort of thing. But it would not be as valuable as the qualitative testing of actually having children in a room and recording, you know, how they're playing the game and what they're saying about it, and then their feelings about it afterwards. So we can get data about stuff like, you know, retention. Like we can get that sort of data very, very easily. But data like, you know, are they having fun, or are they learning the mechanics and everything like that? That would require an interview, I think. So
I mean, it'd be lovely to do more of that testing, but obviously depends on the budget that Surf Lifesaving have, and really what they want to do, how much more they want to learn about the game, which they might really want to do more.
Yeah, I think they will. I think they've been very, very happy with the product so far. And but that question though is a really good one, because I feel like there's a way that you could qualitative test anonymously and get that sort of data about are they retaining information, but the designer in me is immediate, like, I don't know how you would do that without quizzing people, right? And that's not what we want to do. That's not fun. The age group that we're giving the game to is not the kind of age group that would be interested. Yeah.
The real test would be to actually having people playing the game and people not playing the game, and seeing if their behaviour on the actual beach is different. But how do you test that? Like, it sounds like a really logistical nightmare.
Yeah, it would be. You'd need to be part of a university or something to do, you know, you'd need the resources to be able to do that. So.
Okay, so we've got 5 minutes left if anyone else has questions. Nobody else? Okay, cool.
Awesome.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Oh, and thanks to Jennifer Sherler, who was my mentor for this talk, because I haven't done this before, and thanks to Matt for joining me in it as well.
And also, don't forget that at 6 p.m. today, there's a gathering at the boat. There you go, Boat Builder. Yeah, there you go.
Networking event,
Yep, networking event. So make sure you go.
Yep.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.